stage. Morning, Seattle. Afternoon. I've done a lot of practicing this morning. Let me start off with, who here doesn't like flying? I don't like flying at all. Okay, got a few of you. How many of you people don't like serverless? Because let's face it, that word brings out a ton of nerd rage. If I titled this like serverless observability, somebody's head would probably pop in the audience. So, want to introduce myself. My name's Tom McLaughlin. I'm from Serverless Ops. We are an AWS serverless infrastructure and DevOps transition advisory company. Thank you, Ken. And I'm here to present flying versus driving, myths, fears, and opportunity when going serverless. I'm not here to tell you that serverless is like the one way you have to go or anything like that. That's like a holy grail. It's more so just to address the sort of pros and cons that I hear, and so that you can weigh serverless as an option properly within your technical decision making. Let's start with how I came up with this talk. I was coincidentally in an airport. Okay, I was in like Detroit at the time, and I was thinking to myself, okay, conference talk ideas. What are some of the things that, what are some of the objections that I hear when it comes to serverless? And the things that, I really like keyed in on where it's the lack of control. What do you do when AWS fails? There's costs, like compute comes at a premium, and then there's the lack of freedom to control my own platform. I use and get what AWS gives me, and anything they don't give me, I use the Twitter hashtag AWS wishlist and hope somebody's actually listening to me. I started to think about, why don't people like flying? Why don't I like flying, okay? Am I really comfortable putting my hands in trusting in the safety of the airline and pilot? There's tickets, they're kind of expensive. I gotta lay out some cash. And driving means I have like the freedom of the open road, travel on my own schedule, and I don't have to deal with like the tyranny of airport schedules, okay? So let's put these two things together. And how we're gonna do this is we're gonna plan my trip to Seattle. I gave this talk last week at DevOpsDays Denver. You get a slightly different talk though today. So it's about 46 hours and 3,000 miles by car from Boston to Seattle. A direct flight is about 6.5 hours from Boston. And I mentioned I love driving and I really don't like flying. I flew here. I flew here for a bunch of reasons. And let's go over why I made that sort of decision. Let's start with accidents and failure, okay? We're not very good at judging risk. People don't like flying. I totally get it. Like you're like sitting in this metal tube traveling hundreds of miles per hour, and you're relying on air to keep you up. Air didn't really keep that up. Yes, I understand the physics of lift and all that sort of stuff. It still bothers me, and it's still something I have to try not to obsess about when I'm sitting there in the air, okay? And also I have to put my, my trust in these people that I have never met before. Well, let's take a look. I get to use my cool laser pointer. Let's take a look at, car fatality rates versus air travel. All right, air travel is 100 times safer than car travel. Think about that. Like, all these concerns about these like pilots and airline crew that I have, they will probably do a much better job of getting me from Boston to Seattle safely, better than I can do trying to drive myself across country. So let's talk about cloud accidents and failure in the cloud. Every time there is some sort of AWS issue, I hear people boldly claim, that's why we host and run everything ourselves, okay? Because who owns your availability? That's right, you do. And people ignore all the sort of like self-hosted like system issues that they incur. So you'll hear S3 isn't reliable. Let's keep running everything on this rickety SAN over here. Let's like forget about the periodic performance issues that we have with it. Let's forget about the minor failure we had a few months ago that impacted production. We can't trust S3. What's important to remember is that like rare catastrophic issues just like stick out in our brain, okay? But if we experience something enough, we just accept it as completely common. I have an uncle that doesn't like flying at all. He will ride a motorcycle without a helmet, absolutely no problem. Has no problem with that, but once he hears about an airline accident, it's like, see, this is why I don't fly. Look, I've come to the point in my engineering career where I've realized I'm more comfortable owning my own availability by letting AWS do a lot of this work that they're actually kind of better at than me. Here's some of the issues that I worry about when I deal with servers. Is this service, over, undersized, whether it's, horizontally, whether it's vertically? Do we have enough CPU, RAM, and disk space left on that host? Is every single necessary service on that host actually running? You log into a host and you realize that some service died 3 months ago and no one's noticed? Are we all up to date with OS patching? How about, is this syscontrol or config value set properly? And does anyone even remember why we set it that way, or is it just kind of something just lost to time? And finally, my other favorite one, are we on the right version of this? I'm pretty sure this was actually solved like two releases ago. Maybe this bug was introduced, who knows? But this is what I worry about with serverless systems. Is the application responsive? Are application requests returned in a timely manner? What do application error rates look like? Are we also recovering from them and users not seeing these issues? How do we handle application traffic spikes? And how complex of a system have we built? That's a big one. If you thought going from like monolith to microservices introduced complexity, the jump from microservices to nanoservices, creates an enormous amount more complexity. But notice the difference of what we're focusing on here. I'm worried about the application more. I'm not worried about what the application is running on, I'm worrying about the application itself. I trust Amazon to actually take care of those issues from the previous slide for me so I can focus higher up the stack. And some folks might chafe at the limited configurability that AWS provides, but it also reduces the amount of toggles and switches that can actually shoot myself in the foot. The thing that I think to take away when it comes to accidents and failure when you're dealing with serverless is this. 3 points. AWS is probably better at the low-level, undifferentiated work than you do. If you have a network outage, AWS has an entire team dedicated to it. You have you. Less control means also less things that you can break. There are less foot guns in your environment. And finally, this frees you to worry about things higher up the stack. Again, less low-level, undifferentiated work, more high-level work, where you actually have your value. Now let's come to cost. We're in this field, this profession, where you develop this expertise in some sort of problem area, and you work for a company where you're trying to solve the problems in that area. And as you're out there at your booth trying to explain to people what your company does, somebody inevitably comes, interjects, I could build that in a weekend. And before your palm can hit your face, they follow up with, and I could do it for 1/10 of the price that you're charging. I'd run everything on a single T2 Nano. It's okay, thank you, Hacker News. We're really bad again, at estimating costs. So this is what we tell ourselves, and we're guilty of this in the serverless community as well. We look at something, we go, yeah, sure. A request per second for a month, 100 milliseconds, 128 megs of RAM. That'll cost us 55 cents. I could run this entire thing for 55 cents. Versus my T2 Nano, where I'm paying $4.25. All right, and we're now basically arguing over the change for coffee. Let's talk about my flight to Seattle. And Glad someone's laughing still. Here are my options from Boston to Seattle. And this is what it cost last week. It was between $219 and $518. And I'm pretty cheap. I have this perfectly good mode of transportation. I have a Mustang right here. It's really fun, okay? I already own this car, so I can get from Boston to Seattle for zero money, right? Totally. And yeah, there's things we don't really think about when it comes to, cost and so forth. So 3,000 miles at 26 miles per gallon for $3 for the premium, $692 round trip, okay? Let's pretend that I own a Civic. And now it's $443 round trip, shoot. I'm just not making my point here. What I want to point out is, again, this talk was originally written for Denver. And when I did all the cost calculations to get from Boston to Denver, I was able to make my trip cost cheaper by car, okay? Yes, I had to alter reality to fit my narrative, but cast the first stone if you haven't done that before. However, Seattle is not Denver, okay? So AWS will come out with something that says, like, company XYZ saved 84% by moving to AWS LAMBDA. Yep, this other serverless people are definitely laughing at this one. Here's the thing. Company XYZ is not you, okay? They're completely a different organization, probably have different needs. You cannot cargo cult somebody else's accounting estimates. It just doesn't work that way, all right? I worked for a genetics lab for a period of time. We had a ton of idle capacity. We would have saved a ton of money. However, you talk about like a high traffic website, well, that's different. Your cost calculation is going to be different. So let's talk about actually better understanding costs and what to really start factoring in. So here's my flight versus my driving. We got my ticket. Then we got Lyft. I got to get to and from the airport, from home. I got to get to and from the airport in my hotel. I'm up to $463. If I'm driving, I got to stay 3 nights. And I did map this out. Cleveland, Minneapolis, and Billings. I don't know why Billings is the most expensive night in my trip, but for some reason it is. Apparently it's a happening place. I have all the food that I'm probably going to consume. I pretended that I'm going to stop and buy the cheapest thing on the fast food menu every single time. That's a lie. And that also, I totally undercounted the amount of coffee. I still came out to $700. Okay, that's a wildly different estimate. So now LAMBDA and EC2. First thing, AWS charges you twice for LAMBDA. There is once for the compute consumed. That 100 milliseconds of 128 megs of RAM, you get charged that, and then you get charged again for a flat rate for every single invocation. Great, we gone from like 55 cents to $1.09. EC2. Well, you might run things on a single T2 Nano in production. That's great for you. I don't have to work with you. However, where I've been, we have these rules about how you operationalize services. So the smallest thing we'll put into production is an M4 large. And you have to have at least 2 of them in case one of them goes down. You have SaaS providers. You have something for your metrics and logging. You pay by the host. Great. Tack on $10 for each one of those hosts. You have a security product. Tack on $10 for that. All right. Now you went from like $425 to $186 just to get a simple thing into production. And now we're going to start scaling LAMBDA. Now, we're taking now, say, 100 requests per second for the month. Went from $1.09 to $109. We're getting up there. It's getting close to that 186. And then we finally hit production, and here's a few things we realized. We said, it's actually a little bit longer than 100 milliseconds most of the time, and AWS rounds everything up to the next 100 milliseconds, so actually everything is charged for twice as long. We also started finding we had a number of, had enough errors because we're enough out-of-memory errors where 128 megs didn't do it. We had to bump everything up to 256. We're now up to $276, okay? That, original 55 cents went a lot higher. And so now you're probably very confused about, about billing and so forth. When I spent some time talking to, places that have Lambda in production. And both of these comments can be true at the same time. Lambda costs twice as much as running on EC2. Lambda also cut our bill by 85%. How does that work out? So the top one, they said, yeah, it costs twice as much, but guess what? That was only on paper. When we actually looked at our running services, we realized, we have a lot of services that are completely over-provisioned. So we're losing that. We're losing money there. We have other operational inefficiencies within our stack. We have other operational costs. And by the time they actually looked at production, they found the difference really was basically negligible for them. Okay. The second one, Lambda saved us 85% on our bill. What AWS doesn't tell you was they didn't move from EC2. Okay, they were moving from, I believe it was Heroku. So that was one difference. A biggest difference in their accounting of this cost, that company doesn't have an operations team. They accounted for all the people it takes to run their stack. And they said, we don't have these people now. All right? Actually, I don't think they had them before that, but either way, think about that. You are a cost of running your infrastructure. Take your entire team, take how much they make in salary, take how much they are in benefits, divide that by the number of hosts that you maintain your environment, and divide that by 12. That's how much you cost per month just to keep a system running, all right? We're expensive, and some companies are starting to realize that, I won't say unfortunately, but they're starting to realize that, and some are making and some are touting the idea that, oh, we can save a ton of money by not having these people. These are people that think that, serverless is gonna lead to the eventual, adoption of no-ops. I do not believe that at all. For the company on the bottom, it might make sense, knowing approximately a little bit about what they do and so forth. For many of us, it does not, okay? But it is gonna take us redefining our job in a way so that we don't end up on the chopping block, for accounting. If you go to the Serverless Ops blog, I have a very long think piece about it too. So with that, let's move on from cost. And we're gonna go and talk about the ride itself. This was absolutely everyone's flight here, wasn't it? It looked like this. This is what I can do while driving, all right? I can drive. I can also apparently take pictures. Should not be doing that. I pay attention to all the PSAs telling me about distracted driving, and I say, yes, I'm gonna drive. And I'm gonna spend 4 days each way just concentrating on driving. That is 8 days of lost productivity. And here's what I can do when I'm flying. All right, look at this. I can deliver Twitter hot takes, and when I'm done with that, I can actually get some work done. I can maybe update my conference presentation for Seattle. I mean, just look at how much I can do. The whole point of me coming from Boston to Seattle was so I can enjoy DevOpsDays Seattle, okay? It is not so I could sit there and have a fun cross-country road trip at all. And similar to that, the thing I try to get across to a lot of engineers is you're not there to engineer. You are there to solve problems and produce value. It just happens that you have a skill set of engineering in which you can apply that sort of stuff. Now, here's what I do with my serverful systems. Okay, I've got, here's the things I'm spending my time on. I got this config and app management, various things I'm monitoring. I got to scale this thing. All right, I got to make sure once there's a spike in traffic to the ELB, boop, that the front end auto scaling group scales properly, that all the hosts come up. I got to make sure that the back end hosts come up, and then finally I got to take a look, at RDS, make sure that's okay. And this is what I do with serverless. Those first three things, your config management, your app and host management, it's called CloudFormation. It works, and it's something that I don't have to build or maintain or constantly evolve. Next thing, metrics. We did, we started doing the DevOps and we said, okay, we're gonna measure all the things. And then we looked at our developers and said, hey, you gotta measure all this application stuff because we're really busy down here measuring all this host stuff. Well, okay, if all that stuff's gone away, maybe it's time for us to take some of that responsibility back from our developers and say, okay, we're going to take the application metrics back. We're going to take over the primary responsibility for these sort of things. Let's talk about our security. We'll spend a ton of time patching our hosts. This like random CentOS vulnerability on a host that has practically no exposure to the outside. We'll spend a ton of time with that, but the stuff we actually put out into production that the entire hostile internet uses, we kind of just YOLO it. Like, we don't really know what we're putting out there for application dependencies. We really don't know if they're vulnerable. We don't, some of you have a mature AppSec program. Many of us do not, because we're, again, still busy down here and not moving up here. And then, let's talk about scaling. I don't have to scale application gateway. I don't have to scale S3. I don't have to scale API gateway there. I don't have to scale the number of instances of Lambda. What I have to scale is make sure that this entire thing works. Again, not the individual pieces, but the entire system as a whole. With that, this is what I want to get to monitoring. You notice in the last few diagrams, I had all these technical things. And I had this like user sitting there on the left. Never even talked about the user one bit. All right? I want to start focusing on this more. I want to start saying, did we ship something that was useful? What do our feature adoption rates look like? Does this result in user growth? Does this ultimately result in revenue coming in for us? If I'm not busy trying to like operate every single lever within the environment, wow, I can actually start focusing on some of these newer things. What we have on the left is what we love to focus on. This is a Grafana dashboard from like any tech company USA. All right? And metaphorically speaking, the metrics on the left are what determine my salary. That's like this like measurement of how good of an engineer that I am. But when you really start thinking about it, like it's that metric right there. That's the one that actually pays my salary. And does anybody else like see this sort of disconnect between that? It's like what determines my salary is not directly related to what pays my salary. A few years ago, I worked for a company, and first day of orientation, they said to us, "We're not a business card company, we're a technology company." In the back of my mind, I said a few expletives. And then they explained it, and like mind blown right there. I realized, I'm like, okay, I get it. They were a technology company, and that was their differentiator against their competitors, and how how streamlined and efficient they could be. Fast forward 6 years later, well, everyone is a technology company now. Being a technology company is no longer any sort of differentiator. What is a differentiator now is focusing on your core value and delivering a product of value, something that people want, all right? Being the best damn business card company is your differentiator now. I added this in at the last moment last week, and I decided to just kind of leave this slide blank. So I'm just gonna riff a little bit. I'll say this. I don't wanna operate and run systems anymore. And that's okay if you do, but I don't. And every time I say this, I always see a few people's heads pop up. And they're like, wow, awesome, someone else is saying this. I don't wanna set up Vault. AWS Parameter Store and now Secrets Manager exists. My problem is solved. So like 8 years ago, I got into Puppet, and I did it because I didn't want to set up servers anymore. Like for the first year of my job, that was kind of cool, and then it sucked. And I didn't want to do it, and I discovered like infrastructure automation and config management, and I said, this is what I'm gonna do. And people are like, no, but that's our job. We set up servers. And I'm like, no. Our job is to actually deliver value to people, okay? And if we can do this better, we should take a look at it. So I went on this journey, through the Puppet ecosystem, and over several years, several employers, I finally built this infrastructure automation platform that I was completely proud of. I had accomplished probably like 90% of what I set out to do, several years later. I had actually like caught my white whale. And then I ran into a problem. I couldn't find anything else I wanted to do in operations. I didn't want to scale Cassandra or Elasticsearch or stare at Grafana dashboards or anything like that. And I was very frustrated. And I got to a point where actually, I was actually on the verge of leaving tech. I was like, you know what? I'm done. And what saved me wasn't serverless. It was the fact that I had no other usable skills in my career. And so I hung around. I hung around trying to figure out what to do. And I had some free time, and I started playing with LAMBDA. And I started building some serverless services. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is really different. And it really brought me back to where I was with Puppet, all those years earlier. Okay? I saw all this work that I didn't want to do anymore. And I saw that we are now having the tools and technology where I potentially won't have to do most of this work anymore. So that's where I went. And I'm finding more and more ops people are saying this sort of stuff. Surprisingly, it's a lot of organizations, it's not developers driving a serverless adoption. It is operations teams, it's security teams. They're looking at this going, I don't want to do all this work. I really want to focus on this because this is where I see the most value that I can provide. Let's just focus on that. And with that, I want to thank everybody. Yeah, no, it really is. Thank you, everybody. Seattle. Can I do questions?